Give people a minute to join in.
Yeah, give a couple minutes. Alex was 4 times he's in there.
Good afternoon, everybody. We'll give people a few more minutes to join in. Welcome today. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. We're giving it one more minute or so for people to join in, and then we'll go ahead and get going. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm Marty Lisko, CEO of Intel, and your host for this webinar today. Thank you, everybody on Zoom, for joining. And over the next hour, we're going to learn a little bit more about how child welfare organizations are using state-of-the-art technology to help caseworkers gain a deeper understanding of the children and families that they care for. A brief history. Ever since child welfare caseworkers were first required to document their interactions with children and families in case notes, a problem has existed. These notes, plus any other narrative data that they collect, represent about 85% of data about families. Contained in this narrative data is the story of the family, their lived experience, and their interaction with the child welfare organization. In other words, the most important information that a caseworker needs to be aware of. However, there's just so much of it, hundreds to thousands of pages per case, that there really is no way for a caseworker to make any sense of it, especially in the context of large caseloads. On top of that, anytime a caseworker spends reading notes prevents them from spending time face-to-face, either virtually or in person, supporting the child or family. Over the past several years, as machine learning has advanced, solutions to directly address this longstanding problem have arisen. Specifically, natural language processing, otherwise known as NLP, is uniquely suited to help. NLP has the capability of computers to understand the written word and identify key information contained in text. From a caseworker's perspective, NLP has the capability to deliver information to them that they would have otherwise had to find by reading through notes one by one by one, something that we all know no caseworker has the time to do. With NLP, a caseworker is empowered with a much more complete picture of the child and family, equipping them with the necessary information to then make the right decisions with the children and families they work with. And child welfare administrators can use this information to improve their visibility to their organization, helping them to make data-driven decisions on policy and practice. Today, to talk much more about this, we have 3 guests with us. We have Tracy Roydans and Christy Bearden from the Allegheny County Department of Human Services in Pennsylvania, and Daniel Stein, founder of Stewards of Change. Stewards of Change has been looking at the role of technology in the health and human services for nearly 20 years. Daniel will share his insights on the possibilities and reality of the use of NLP, machine learning, and other state-of-the-art technologies in this space. Allegheny County DHS is recognized across the US as being on the very leading edge of the use of technology in practice in child welfare. Tracy Rordens, who has the very understated title of Business Applications Manager, will speak to Allegheny County's initiative to provide NLP capabilities to their staff to assist them in delivering care to those they serve. And Christy Bearden, a caseworker at Allegheny County, will tell us what having these tools means to caseworkers and their impact on their ability to do their job. And after all three have finished, we'll open it up for questions at the end. If you have any questions during this webinar, go ahead and enter them by pressing the Q&A button on Zoom and then enter your question there. We'll start with Daniel. Daniel, I understand your organization conducted research around the application of AI in child welfare. Can you elaborate on everything that you learned?
Absolutely, thanks, and welcome everybody. I'm really excited to be here today. As Marty said, I've been working in this area of improving data and technology systems for about 20 years, starting back in 2004. And we've been really interested in how to support workers initially within the child welfare space, but more broadly over time. How do we support better decision making? And that's obviously dependent on getting better data and having access to better data. And as we saw over years and years and years, the access to data has really been restricted to kind of administrative data, the stuff that's in kind of drop-down boxes and things like that. And that's very limiting, especially with the first generation of SACWIS systems. The limitations were really tough, and getting access to any of the narrative data was really tough. So over the years, we've been looking at different solutions and different providers, and really not being that excited about what we were seeing out there. In 2011, we were planning one of our national symposium, and one of our partners at the time was IBM, and they had just finished beating the world champion on Jeopardy with their IBM Big Blue solution, which was really quite amazing. And I got very excited about that. And we were able to actually get one of the engineers who worked on that program to come speak at our conference at Yale. And it was a really interesting and insightful presentation, and something that really, I think, exploded everybody's minds. The ability of computers to really read unbelievable amounts of information, digest it in a way, and be able to actually put it together to answer questions was the first time that I saw the potential power of that kind of technology, and really stimulated a lot of thinking in my mind. How do we harness that in the social services and child welfare space? And so that set us off on a quest for learning more about that, which we did over the years. Fast forward about 5 years, and we began to really focus in on this topic in particular. A couple of things that happened at that time. Back at that point in time, there was a blue ribbon federal commission that issued a report that was called Within Our Reach, a national strategy to eliminate child abuse and neglect fatalities. It was literally a federal panel, and it was really calling out the need for better tools to address the challenges that we're facing the child welfare space, continue to face, and have many years faced them for a long time. And in that report, there was really a call to arms, I might call it, for bold innovation and new tools, especially things that would support evidence-based practice. Simultaneous, the federal government began to implement the new CWIS regulations and the new approach, which was really exciting because we had been looking at that for many years in terms of its limitations on one-way information flow, and the sort of the perspective on CWIS was much broader, much more open than its predecessor, the SACWIS systems. So that felt like that was creating sort of an opportunity for some innovation at the federal space. And then finally, we had the opportunity to actually dive into NLP and cognitive computing at the time. It was referred to, and looking at how these tools might be applied to child welfare. And so we convened a series of roundtable meetings across the country, spoke with at least 100 different workers, supervisors, managers, QA, technologists, academics, and just people across the whole spectrum to get their input and get their thoughts about kind of that what if situation. If we look to the future and say, what if there was a machine that could actually read your case notes and provide some input back to you? It was some of the most exciting conversations we had. And these were many people with a lot of experience in this field. The response was extraordinary. The interest in this was just really off the charts in many ways. And I think the universal cry was no more green screens, please get us off the green screens, get us to modern technology. I'm going to go through a couple of the recommendations that came out of that. But before I do that, I want to just mention a couple of the challenges that the field faced in 2016. And these might sound familiar to you. This is 2016, increases in out-of-home placement, declining adoption numbers, opioid crisis was really starting up again, reduced funding for 4E and 4B, inability to recruit sufficient or the right types of foster parents, workforce challenges, both recruiting and retaining workforce, the need for recruiting kinship families, better models to identify risks and strengths, for CFSR results, lack of data sharing, goes on and on and on, the lack of data portability, and a big gap between the tools that people brought to work in terms of their iPhone and what they actually had to use when they got to work. And that dichotomy was extraordinary. There was a comprehensive sense of the need for better tools. And I think that jumped out, and the ability to solve some of those really intransigent problems. So the problems, the participants were incredibly enthusiastic. They were able to look into the future, and they saw the applications. The biggest thing, and Marty's already mentioned this, is the ability to work with, understand case notes. Workers spend so much time developing their notes, writing them, editing them, reviewing them. Supervisors had that same thing. And yet there had been no ability to really automate that process, or to search those notes, or to really synthesize them at all. So in terms of even finding the kids in the home, whether or not the appropriate adults were in the home, what kind of medications kids are on, what are the medical conditions, housing, many of the kind of the social determinant factors was really a driving factor in terms of trying to drive towards greater safety and the ability to improve the ability to serve and to provide services and supports. Other things like being able to identify fraud and sort of cutting and pasting and missing reports or late reports, being able to find kinship families in the solutions, and the ability to augment people's intelligence around what they were seeing. How could they actually benefit from the literature and the research that had been conducted over the years and bring that to bear? One of the things I didn't mention, but when we were looking at some of the IBM work and some of the other cognitive work, was the ability to consume extraordinary amounts of knowledge and information, and to bring to the workers at that point in time, doctors, their ability to do diagnosis based on a lot of information that was available that might not be available to the individual caseworkers. So in addition to the ability to actually work with the case notes, to be able to make sense out of that, and to capture the information, and to be able to search that information, there are other kinds of things that were also really important. And sort of summarized sort of as document summaries and guidance. What are the office policies? What are the policies related to confidentiality and privacy and procedural manuals? How do we get access to that? And how do we find rapidly those kinds of information that are really critical for making decisions and being in compliance with the requirements? And then, of course, there's a larger sort of aggregate and case management kind of component to this. How can we really mine these notes and this information to support the CFSR process, or to develop program improvement plans based on what we know about the family, and really be able to provide insights in terms of the kinds of reporting that would be necessary, both at the state level, the local level, and just for themselves. And then I think finally there was a kind of a broader set of requirements or interests people has. And we really kind of took off the limitations. And what if you could really do, go wild with this, one might say. And one of the things that really popped up at the time was the idea of social determinants. How do we know enough about the entire family, not in addition to knowing a lot about the child and the parents, but what's the environment? What's the housing? What's the nutrition? What are those things that could actually bring intelligence to the management of that? Things like also evidence-based practice. That was really beginning to sort of come onto the scene, and the ability to measure the fidelity of programs. Is there a way that computers could actually help do that in a way that would be helpful? And then, of course, the whole area of supervision and quality improvement, right? How do we help supervisors address the issues given the limited time, the enormous amount of cases out there? And that idea of Pareto. How do we focus on those cases that are the most unknown or the most risky, or those that seem to have the most complex situations there? A couple of other things that were really of interest was, is it possible to match the workers with the families that are being served? So are there different sort of historical factors that we could look at in terms of how successful was that worker working with families of a particular type or particular diagnosis or particular issue? Could we actually assist that? And in the same way, could we actually help match potential foster parents with the children who need out-of-home placement? That also applies, of course, to adoptions. Is there a better way to understand the families and the children that we're trying to place? All told, one of the really the incredible areas of interest was around prevention as well. Everybody's always so reactive in this space, and as you kind of unleash the possibilities of getting more and better insights, the question of how do we identify needs early on? How do we see when things are happening so we can intervene earlier? And that was, again, probably one of the most exciting areas. People talked about that. So I'm just kind of covering at a very high level some of these areas. These are all covered in the report. We'll put a link into there. I reread it recently. It's 6 years old, but it's still very, very pertinent. And so what I want to do is I want to sort of turn this back to Marty now and say that, it hasn't been that long since we really had these conversations. And it's only been 5 years where we've gone from really concept to implementation. It's really exciting to see what Allegheny is doing. And I'm excited to hear what Tracy and Christy are going to tell us about what's actually happening on the ground there now. So with that, back to you, Marty.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It sounds like it went from concept to reality in a relatively short amount of time. Really going from what it could be, as was written in the paper that Stewards of Change published back in 2016, to where we are now, which is let Allegheny show you how it's been successful, right? Which is a really short amount of time to go from concept to reality, especially in our field. So we're looking forward to hearing from Tracy and Christy at Allegheny to how this was done. So yeah, I will turn over to Tracy right now. Hey, Tracy, Allegheny County has a reputation for being on the forefront of technology-enabled human services. Can you tell us why NLP became a priority at Allegheny, and what you're doing with it?
Sure. I'm having a tiny technical issue sharing my screen, so let me get there.
We can see it.
Oh, you can see it. Perfect.
Yep, just
Fantastic. Okay, welcome. Thank you, Marty. My name is Tracy Burdensome. I am, like Marty introduced me, the Business Application Manager for Allegheny County Department of Human Services. I'm excited to talk to you today about our unstructured data project. I've been able to lead it here in Allegheny, and it's super exciting because my role here right now is in technology, but I started as a caseworker here a long time ago, about 18 years, in fact. So the entire, my whole career really is focused on bringing technology to help the folks on the ground. So they do such incredible work. They're the most important staff that we have here and across the country. Folks are doing some incredible work on the ground. And I think it's about time that technology really stepped up to support their work. So knowing technology is out there to help, it's really fun to provide a tool to them that makes a real difference. Like it's a real impact that I'm going to tell you a little bit more about. So thank you. I'll tell you just briefly about Allegheny County. So we are an integrated Department of Human Services, meaning under our one umbrella, we have my department, which is a support department, analytics, technology, and planning. And then we have our program offices, including aging, Office of Community Support, child welfare, behavioral health, and some housing. So I say that to explain that not only are we an integrated department and we all, collaborate together to work with the families that we serve. It's very common for a family to be served by many of our departments. We also have the luxury of integrated data as well, which is really important in all the work that we do. Allegheny County prides ourselves on being data-driven in our decision-making, in our understanding of our families. In the past, we've used mostly, fields, right? Structured data. We understand, the race and ethnicity of our families. We understand the services that they've encountered. We know a little bit about like what we've paid for a service. A family is so much more than that though, right? So while we've done really great things using those structured fields, this is a really fantastic new opportunity to use the actual family story, which we call it the family story, and we think it's buried essentially in our case notes, in narrative data throughout our assessments. There's like thousands of fields in our case management system that require paragraphs written by a caseworker. And there's a really rich information there about what's going on with our families. And it's really exciting to start to tap into that. About in Allegheny County, each caseworker has about 14 families. I think it's a little bit higher. Like the rest of the country, we're having, staffing problems here. So it's hard to keep our staff. It's such incredibly hard work. So they have a lot on their plate. They have at least 14 families they're serving on average. Each one of those cases has about 128 notes. That's an average again. Some have many more, some have less. But the notes are stored in our case management system, like many other systems, and ours is actually pretty advanced, but it's still quite hard to get to. So you put the data in, and in some ways, it kind of just is in a black box now. So if you need to go find the information again, it's quite cumbersome. It's also, then the data is not, it's not kind of collaborated in one way, right? So it's like all segmented. So there's no way to really just see that like rich story across the family and then more even across our entire organization. So what are all of our families facing? Questions like how many of our families have been impacted by IPV? That's such an important question that we need to understand to do good work here. And we don't have structured data to tell us that. So it's in our case notes. The time savings is so real. We have entire departments dedicated to reading records and understanding what's going on so that we can improve. If we can do better cutting that time, I think we have an obligation to do so. And then back to the integrated, because we are integrated, we have, for example, the same family served by our housing staff. So they may be calling and walking them through, how to get into a shelter today, or, how to help them with their rent and utilities, for example. That's pretty important information that sometimes is segmented off in the housing notes. And the CYF caseworker is either not aware or late to know that. So they might maybe find that out eventually. But the power of a tool like this is we can get all of that information. We know that in the data, in the back end, we know that all of those notes are tied to the same family. We have the ability to grab them all together and present it to best understand the families that we serve. So our goals here are really mostly, our goal is to help caseworkers, supervisors, on the ground staff, including quite a few support staff. In Allegheny, we're really lucky. We have, our caseworker team has a ton of support, specialists in behavioral health, nurses, folks that really have a specialty, and they all help the caseworkers, and they also enter notes. So we want to support all of them to make sure we better serve our clients. The quality improvement work is really well served by being able to understand the notes faster. Just the amount of time that they have to take now can be dedicated to like more critical thinking about what's going on, how to make improvements instead of just digging for data or in stories. And we think all of this, like we think and we see, if you have better information around, who's involved, like a simple thing like grandma's name and number being buried in a note, if you can get that faster, that actually has a very, very impactful thing. It could change the trajectory of a child's life. So if you can make sure that that information is, really at fingertip access for our caseworkers, it can really change the decision-making process. This is information they have access to today, and the tool really just makes sure they have it faster in a summarized way so that they can do better work. So when we, this slide helps me talk through our work to date with Augintel. This was fun work, to be honest. There's a model behind the scenes, and like sometimes it was intimidating for me at first to say, oh, there's a natural language processing model behind the scenes. I'm a social worker. That feels a little intimidating, but the cool thing was it's very easy for our staff, our caseworkers, to understand, and in fact, they really drove the work here. So we had this fun, I think it's fun because it's different than normal work, tool where, they would be presented with a sentence, and they would be asked some simple questions they had to react to. So is this a sentence that you think is, a potential risk or a protective factor, strengths? Is there something here essentially to tag? There's a lot of sentences that are just not like tag worthy, right? They're like, caseworker went to the home, nobody was there. Okay. And in the pre-Augintel world, you might have taken 3 or 4 clicks to get to that. And you're like, oh, there's nothing here of value. So those sentences we can really just like put to the side for caseworkers. That might be helpful as far as like attempts to visit, for example, but when you're looking for risks and strengths, it's not as helpful. But they could tell us, is there something here to tag? And then they would tell us, is it substance abuse? Does this indicate to you IPV, a strength, positive parenting? What is it that this sentence tells you? So it didn't take a ton of that, to be honest. We had a group of staff label sentences for a few weeks, and then we kind of looked at accuracy. We repeated it to make sure we were even more accurate. And it was really easy to understand. And again, the caseworkers and supervisors on the ground are the experts in that, and they really drove refining the model in that way. So that work's been quite fun. I'll pause there, Marty.
Right, we're talking right now about what it looked like to pilot this and then bring it to rollout, right? And right now, Allegheny is in the rollout phase. But I'd like to learn, what you learned along the way during this process from, day one all the way to rollout across your organization.
Yep. So the pilot was really successful here, and I mean that not that it all went beautifully. It was successful because we structured it in a way where we got great feedback and we were able to tweak things. So one of the things I didn't talk about yet were queries. So within the tool, there's the ability to sort of look across cases about an issue. The IPV is a good example. And then there's also like safe sleep conversations, for example. So, if there's a young child on a caseload, and I think most places require a conversation about safe sleep with the parents or caregivers. Those are documented in notes. So we can quickly see in a query all of the situations, the families where, there's a young one and that conversation has not yet been documented. That allows our staff to take a really critical look at the families that we need to make sure this has been addressed. Sometimes it has been addressed and hasn't made it into the notes, and that's fine. Other times, caseworkers are reminded, oh yeah, I really do need to have that conversation. And it's such a critical thing. During the pilot, we had a team approach. So we would have a group of caseworkers, their supervisor and leadership join the pilot together. And that was really helpful because then they sort of learn from each other. They don't really, the IT team bringing them a new tool, it lacks credibility until you use it. So you want to learn from your peers and from folks like Christy, who you'll hear from, and you'll understand right away why she's one of our super users here. So they learned from each other, and then we checked in with them often and got feedback. We actually did this really cool scavenger hunt activity. We wanted to prove time savings. We were pretty sure this tool would save us time. We did an activity that we have a client experience team here that helped us lead this, and they took a group of workers looking for information the old way, which would be like digging through KIDS and other systems that we have. KIDS is our application here in Allegheny for child welfare. And then the other folks would use Augintel, and we really tracked their time. So we did prove it was in fact faster, but we also, found some problems we needed to fix. So we were not, for example, combining notes for a family across all of their referrals and cases. So our data is kind of segmented by each time a family has come in. We have, words around what went on. And we were also segmenting it in Augintel. And as soon as they brought that to us, it was like, of course we should have done that. And then the cool thing is that we listened to them, fixed it right away, looped back, and that helped us really gain their trust. And then they continued to use it. So the pilot was about 80 users, which was about a quarter of all of our staff. We included, like I said, caseworker units, and then some support staff, like paralegals found a fantastic use for this tool in preparing for court hearings. So we got their feedback as well. So it was overall quite a fun piece of work and successful.
Thanks, Tracy. But, as we know, in the deployment of technology, everything isn't always wine and roses. What were some of the problems you ran into, in addition to the referral issue, that you had to resolve during this process?
Yeah, so the part of the work that I don't like to remember and I kind of block out is it's not fun to worry about like user profiles and account setup. So I don't like to, I did it but it was painful and not fun. We share data from our KIDS system through an API with the tool. And we're trying really hard to get to like an automated staff information sharing, but that means we had to clean up on our end, like how we categorize our staff into certain profiles so that the permissions can be set up correctly. Not fun work and painful. And some of it is still, to be honest, a manual process where we have to say like, oh, this user should actually be in. Let's go back and fix their profile on KIDS so we can make it all clean. So that's the less fun part of the work. And I think just with any IT solution, it's kind of the back end part that kind of has to be done. We did also see, so we have that Ipv Query, which does highlight, mentions of IPV across our system. And it's really important and well used by our support specialist that is really well trained up in IPV and helps make sure that families are connected to the appropriate services. When we first had that query and I got to take a look at it, there was a lot of false positives, meaning a lot of caseworkers will say IPV discussed, no issues, basically. And they word that in all kinds of different ways. No concerns about IPV, IPV not an issue, denies IPV. All of those false positives were showing up in the query as mentions of IPV. And so then it made the query obsolete, right? That doesn't help anybody because it's not real. The cool thing was, and I was, to be honest, frustrated at first, like, oh, this isn't right. What are we going to do? I gave the team like 3 examples of sentences where it was coming up with a false positive. They retrained the model over the weekend, and Monday it was literally perfect. I went through and I was like on a scavenger hunt to find a false positive and prove that it was still wrong. And it's completely accurate now. And it really does highlight the families that have a concern around IPV. And it's really good to use for just making sure someone is following up on the issue.
Thanks, Tracy. Last question before we move over to Christy. Child welfare workers tend to be reluctant to adopt new technologies. Walk me through how you and your leadership and caseworkers work together to begin to integrate NLP into their day-to-day work.
Yeah, the caseworkers are tough. They're tough people. They have to be, and they are hard to win over because we've given them, to be honest, technology to use that makes their life very, very difficult. Most technology given to them is, more work. So it's quite hard to sell them on this new idea that's really going to help them. So we got a little panicky, like, a couple weeks into the pilot, our usage was not fantastic. And I'm really happy that we were patient because I think on the ground, there's nothing we can do as IT professionals to really like sell it. They have to try it and learn from each other. So we really had some like champions kind of bubble up here where, quick adopters. And what we did was highlight their stories and we asked them to talk to their peers. And it's really an environment where you learn best from, the caseworker sitting next to you. And that has worked really well here. The other thing that is so critical that we did is listen to them. We asked for their feedback. We meant it. And when we got their feedback, we addressed it. So that sort of loop back to them was really important to gain their trust. And it worked really well. It worked really well for us. And I think that sort of like natural onboarding is going to be the way we do it going forward.
Thank you, Tracy. Christy Bearden, as we said, is a caseworker at Allegheny County. And Christy, I have a few questions for you. We'd like to talk about, how the work at Allegheny directly impacts caseworkers. Can you tell us a little bit more about what it used to be, right? What did a caseworker's life look like looking for data in case records, but before Augentel?
Right. So essentially, the system that we have in place, it's a good system, but when you have to go back and try and find notes, you almost have to pinpoint the date. You have to click on notes, because if a family's been involved, they could have so many notes, home visits, and you just have to keep clicking on them and to go back and keep going back to find what you're looking for. So there was a lot of clicking, a lot of different screens, and it was just it's time consuming. It can be very cumbersome.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And how does Augentel change that?
What I find exciting about Augentel is it's not just from the moment that the screen comes up, it's not intimidating to look at. There's not a lot of places that you have to click. It's very straightforward. It's easy to use. It's fast. It's self-explanatory. You don't need a manual. You don't need to go through multiple training sessions and sit through classes to know how to use this program. It's very user-friendly. It's just so simple to use.
Thanks. And
really makes it easier.
Thanks. And I know, in our previous discussions, you gave all sorts of examples on the type of information that it helps you to find. Can you just sort of run through some of what the top of those might be?
Right. So to start, when you get a case, you do a record review. You want to go back through any previous involvement that the family has had with the agency, either as adults, parents, or as children, to see, what their history is like, what their past issues were, how they were resolved. You see what worked, what didn't work, the family members, because we always do family finding. Augentel is very useful in family finding. It's very easy to pull up family members, find anybody that's been involved with the case, support staff, other agencies that have been involved. It saves me a lot of time with preparing for court, a tremendous amount of time preparing for court. I actually use Augentel while I'm in court now. So, and every week I have supervision with my supervisor. I use Augentel for that. If she has any questions about anything, I can just pull it right up and tell her what was done, when it was done, and where it's at right now. Mm-hmm. Very fast.
Thanks. And so when you're accessing it in court, you're accessing it on your mobile device?
I actually use I take my laptop with me, my computer, and a lot of times there's, multiple legal counsel and the judge, and you'll be asked questions by all of them. It's mostly about services put in place, when they were put in place, if they're ongoing, what the services entail, with the progress of the treatment plan, things of that nature. But I don't have to write all those things down now. I don't have to make notes and flip through my notebook during the hearing, because I can just type that in the search and it pulls it right up, and I can say on this date, they were referred to this service, and this is where we're at.
That's great.
Yeah. It's very-
And regarding case transfers, I think you had
Mhm.
mentioned, when you're getting a new case, how does this impact your ability to come up to speed on a case?
Right. Case transfers, Augentel is very important, I found, when I get a case transfer. A lot of times these are more involved cases. I'll get them, and they're already cases before I get them. They've moved from investigation to case. So there's a lot of notes on them already for whatever reason. So it helps in that I can quickly know who's involved in the case, what the allegations are, what has already been addressed with that family, what services that they are involved with, any legal issues that are pending, that will be documented, easy to find, easy to pull up, and any future court dates that are set. Those are in the notes as well, for if they have other legal matters. So it's very fast when you get that, and it really brings you up to speed quickly, because those cases are usually already moving at a certain pace, and you've got to jump in and get on step with that. So Augentel is very useful for that.
And one last question, Christy.
Sure.
Can you estimate, in any particular week, how many hours you save using Augentel versus, what it was like before?
Sure. I can tell you, I want to say on an average week, it saves me about 5 hours. Every week you get a new case, you close a case. So every week you're doing the record review again. I have multiple cases that are court active. So I'm always getting ready for various types of hearings, and different meetings with providers. So yeah, it saves a lot of time, substantial amount of time. It definitely makes it easier.
Thank you, Christy. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. Just two last questions for Tracy. Tracy, as you know, many states and counties are moving to CWIS systems, which take years to complete. When it comes to NLP and potentially adopting the use of NLP, what advice do you have for people or organizations that are in this process?
So what I'll say about that is in Allegheny, we know we're not going to have our system, much longer. Our state's going statewide, and we'll make some changes. We won't have the same system. The reason we think it's really important not to wait is two things. It doesn't take long. This took us about 6 months from starting the work with Augentel to getting a tool out to our entire agency. That's really quick in the world. And to be honest, I think we have an obligation to arm our staff with the tools necessary to do their work better. I would feel really, really crappy about knowing this tool exists that could save Christy 5 hours a week and not get it in her hands as soon as possible. I think it's just such a valuable tool that can also be plugged into, your next system. So I think, if you have data, which I think everybody has, in some format, lots of narrative data, I personally don't see any reason to wait. And I think our staff out there deserve it. And I'm just so thankful that I was able to help be a small part of making sure, that time savings is just incredible. Every time she says it, it's alarming to me in such a good way.
Thank you. And last question before we move over to the many questions that we have in the chat and in the Q&A screen. What's your vision for where this goes with Allegheny?
Yeah, so my former director always said the work is never done, so don't get too excited and don't, pat yourself on your back too long. So the work is not done here. This might address one of the questions in the chat also, as I was kind of scrolling through. At this point, the Allegheny has, in the Augentel tool, we have our case contact notes and referral, so all stages of it, which includes our provider notes. But we have not gotten to things like our supervisor logs. So that's where the supervisor and caseworker, like Christy mentioned, they meet together And there's a narrative that comes out of that meeting, which is really valuable information about like, what are the next steps the caseworker is supposed to do, for example. That's really, really good, rich data. We have not prioritized that data yet. So several next steps that we want to do in Allegheny is getting the rest of the narrative data for child welfare in. And then we want to go DHS wide in number of users and the data. So I want those housing notes in there so that the caseworker from CYF has full visibility into, the other services and rich data. And also I want the housing staff to have access to, the information and story that, so then we can ask the family a little bit less to repeat the same thing over and over. So there's big plans in Allegheny to continue and get better and better at this work.
Thank you. I'll move over to some of the questions, and I may pick one of you to answer them. But the first question is from Christian Geneste from DC CFSA. What are the potential risks and concerns associated with the use of NLP in our field? And how can data professionals mitigate those concerns? Maybe Tracy, I might point to you to answer that.
Sure, I'll take a stab at it. So the biggest concern that I have about this work, honestly, is this is not, that we do not ever want to imply that this is the risks and protective factors that a family has. This is only reflecting back to our staff the notes contained in our record. We cannot mislead folks and say things like, things are going really well. You should feel really confident about what's going on with this family. Not true at all. This is one tool to make reading case notes faster, easier, more digestible. It is in no way predictive, and it is in no way an assessment of the family's needs and strengths. Caseworkers have to do that work. And I think the most important thing that we do here in Allegheny is talk about that, make sure that folks are fully aware. This is only reflective of what's in the notes. If a caseworker has not done due diligence to note all of the important things, there's no data there to see. So you cannot you can't assume. You have to go out and do the work.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I'll add a little bit, to that, right. Augentel is designed never to get in the middle of, making a decision, right? We're delivering information to the people so that they have the most complete set of information to make the most informed decision. And in no way is any decision being made by the tool itself. A question from Larry Shore. This may be another one for Tracy. I apologize. Do you expect there will be measurable financial impact from Augentel? Will Augentel increase caseworker capacity without adding new caseworkers, or can Augentel surface rising risk situations to ensure children are at risk are identified earlier before harm is done?
All good questions. I think the financial savings is, I think, will be hard to measure, but one we should try to do. The time savings is super real, but I would say that really just allows Christy now to spend more time, with the families that she's serving. So that time savings should not necessarily be looked at like, oh, that means we need less caseworkers. I think it means we can do more quality work and redirect her time more usefully to benefit, the families that we work with. But I think there's a potential. You could probably look for some fiscal. We have a fiscal unit actually. When we did training over the last few weeks, we have a team of eligibility specialists that really look to make sure our 4E reimbursement is as best as it can be. They actually reached out and said, can we please use this tool? They ended up in the training. I don't even know how they got there because we didn't think they needed it. And then they said, oh, we so need this because we find a lot of information in case notes that help us understand what happened when the kiddo actually went into care, who they were removed from. There's structured fields, but like in order to make sure those are accurate and to fill them in when needed, they rely heavily on notes. So there's an aspect of there that our fiscal team internally, I didn't even see that one coming, but there's some potential there. I think it can help identify risks earlier, meaning like make sure that folks are paying attention to them. This isn't going to predict, like I said, it's not going to say like, hey, this is leading towards this problem. That's not this tool. But it can make sure those things are surfaced in a way that QA staff, support staff, supervisors can use to make sure we're kind of more on top of things. So I hope that answers your question. Others feel free to join in.
Question from Warren Wessling. Where in the timeline did you work out the user profile cleanup and the user group identification?
We kind of did that twice. We did a version of it for the pilot, and we did that manually. So for the pilot users, we had 80 of them, and I simply gave Augmentel who are the people, here are their email addresses, and this is where they sit. In the tool, there's like a hierarchy, so you have to know who to report to, for example, so that everybody sees the right stuff. That was manual. Now that we are live, we're doing our very best to repeat that and trying to make it automated. So through an API, we are sharing all those staff details from our system and cleaning up our system so that when we share it, it's just automatically works. And so we're still going through that right now. So we did it twice. We did it in pilot planning, and we're doing it again right now in, I guess, training and rollout. We are rolled out and still fixing.
Next question. You mentioned progress of treatment plans. Does this mean case notes from treatment agencies are accessed, or is it just child welfare case files?
I'll answer this one as well. So our kids system is used by ourselves and our providers. So if it's a contracted provider that is working with one of our families for in-home services, placement, they document contacts that summarize their work with the visits to the children, visits between parents and children. That's all documented in our case notes and included in this tool. We have not gotten to, we will eventually get to the rest of the narrative data. We're not there yet. So it's just notes, but many of those notes are written by our providers and youth support partners, nurses, all of that is all included. It's kind of up to each agency though. We prioritize the data to be shared, and we have much more to prioritize to get it in there.
These are more questions for Tracy. Sorry, Christy. 6 months of work for how many staff to implement? Technical staff. So maybe Tracy, a breakdown of the support from, all groups within the organization.
Sure. On my end, there was a core team. I led it. I was the project manager for this work. I happen to also have knowledge of our system. So I was able to serve as project manager, but also kind of a technical expert in making sure the API happened. It went correctly. We did all the mapping. So I served both of those roles. We also have a strong analytics team here. So we had our chief analytics officer as an advisor and a support person throughout this project. Katie Collins, she leads we have an advisory group that helps us just sort of do this good thinking and making sure we're really making sure we're doing the best work that we can do. She helps us lead that. We had our safety permanency best practice lead also on the core team. So there's about 5 of us on our core team. The labeling exercise probably took about 20 staff. Those were caseworkers and supervisors. It didn't take a lot of their time though. We would ask them for an hour or so a week, and I think we did that maybe 4 times. So to be honest, for a pretty big IT go live, it didn't take a ton of time. I was certainly not full-time on this project at all. It was one of my many projects here in Allegheny. So able to kind of manage it with a lot of support from the Augmentel team.
And I will add, the feedback we've received from other organizations we've worked with is that, the lift from a personnel perspective is not high at all. And we'd be happy to provide a detailed breakdown of what staff and what roles are needed, month by month throughout the deployment. Question from John Velasquez. This may go to Christy, may Tracy. It seems like although 5 to 6 hours of time savings was important, is it really the quality of information that improves caseworker experience and reduces stress?
I think the time savings allows me to focus more on the actual work rather than just digging through and clicking to try and find old notes. If I have to find information for a family to get a referral put in place for them, or to find a family member to place a child with, I want to do it the fastest way I can. I need to get that done, and I need to move on to the next task that I have at hand. So I find it absolutely invaluable, and it is a great stress reducer, but it also is the way that things are structured in Augentel. It also prompts me if I've forgotten something, if there's something I need to address, it helps bring that to my attention. And sometimes I need that. So I appreciate it. I believe that it's the quality of the notes that are put in and the receptiveness to using the tool and making it part of your daily habit of using it. Save that time, move on, and get to the actual work with the people instead of the administrative end of paperwork and things. So that's my opinion.
Another question, again, this may be for Tracy as well. Have you seen opportunities to use Augentel to assist with data quality? You mentioned using it for missing data. Are there other examples that assist a caseworker or managers with improving the data quality in the system of record?
Yeah, I think there's probably an unintentional consequence. This wasn't really one of our goals to improve the quality of case notes, but I can tell already in the conversations we've had with staff that they're thinking harder because they want to make sure their notes are clear enough to, you know, be summarized the way that they would expect them to be. So when they say like, well, I would have, you know, I'm surprised that this isn't being mentioned more, then they, you know, can look at their notes and say, well, I didn't actually document it. Like, it's just not there. So I think there is an unintended like training opportunity here to help folks refine how they document case notes. And to be honest, in Allegheny, we don't have a very structured approach to how we do it. We're probably most structured during the investigation because we have certain requirements that have to be documented. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity for the future to understand. I don't think it's like an immediate, oh, like this will fix the world, but I think it's a fantastic way to talk to staff and have them sort of just like self-reflect on what they're doing. And I think they're doing that before we even asked them to.
I would just add one point here on from adult learning theory, that when people don't see their data back or they don't interact with it because it's just really a one-way feed, I'm complying. We know that when people have access to their information, that the quality of that information gets better because it's useful to them and they know that someone's looking at it. So there's your experience, I think, is inherent to that natural process of people getting used to seeing their data and then it becoming an asset to them as opposed to a deficit, something that they have to just go and report. So I think that as we focus more on that, I think that you'll naturally see an increase. I suspect everyone will.
This is a question for Christy. Do you primarily use the search function, or do you use the risk, strengths, and social determinant bubbles when trying to locate information or make decisions? Can you discuss the differences?
I use the search function it all depends on what I'm doing. The search function I use when I'm in court and they ask me a question about, you know, when a referral was placed or anything like that. I use it for supervision as well. When I get a case handoff or I'm doing a record review, I use the bubbles. I want to know more about the details about what is actually going on with that family. I want to know if this is an ongoing issue that we thought we resolved previously and it's coming back. I want to know how serious it was, who was involved. So I use the bubbles when I'm doing record reviews and case handoffs, and the search function for other things, but I use the people search. I actually found a family member doing a record review that I did not know about, I was not told about, and I was able to place a child with, as opposed to that child being put into foster care. The family no longer communicated with that family member, and in doing a record review using Augentel, a family member showed up, and that child was able to be placed with this family member who was appropriate. And I can't say that I would have found that because I don't know that I would have had the time to go that far into the rabbit hole, you know, another way.
Thank you, Christy. And with that, we've come to the top of the hour. Thank you to Christy, to Tracy, to Daniel for participating today. Thank you for all the attendees for joining. In the chat, you can visit www.augentel.us. If you'd like to contact us, there is a contact form at the very bottom. Feel free to reach out to us or contact Tracy or Christy directly with questions. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. We will post a recording of this webinar as well if you'd like to share with your colleagues. And we hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.